And Donald Trump's role in hush money payments to a porn star is now under legal scrutiny. Manhattan prosecutors have started presenting evidence to a grand jury in this longest-running criminal investigation into the former president. I think it's 7 years. The payment was made to Stormy Daniels back in 2016, while Trump was running for the White House. Trump fixer Michael Cohen went to prison in 2018 for his role in the hush payment, after testifying that the payout was made in Trump's direction. The New York Times reports that David Pecker, the former National Enquirer publisher who helped broker that deal, was seen going into the building where the grand jury is sitting just yesterday. Joining me now, Washington Post senior national political correspondent Ashley Parker, New York Times reporter Jeremy Peters, and Andrew Weissmann, former senior prosecutor on the Mueller probe and former general counsel for the FBI. So, Andrew, first to you. You are the lawyer among us. You see David Pecker going into the grand jury building. This is all reinvigorated, but we thought that Alvin Bragg, the DA, after Cy Vance's term was up, had dropped this case. Two prosecutors quit in protest. It seems like it just never dies.
Well, there is this issue of sort of what is going on, and we don't know. But it is important to remember that Alvin Bragg did say when the two lead prosecutors left that the investigation is continuing. At the time, we all sort of scoffed and thought, could that really be true, or is that just something that prosecutors say? We did see that Alan Weisselberg was, in fact, convicted. We did see the Trump Organization, two of them, be convicted. And so there clearly is life there of some sort. It is also important to remember that the statute of limitations, that is the time frame in which a prosecutor has to bring charges or it's just barred forever, appears to run at the end of this spring. And so there may be a reason that this is now being presented to a grand jury and that Alvin Bragg is thinking, you know what, let's put people in and let's see what the evidence looks like. There's no decision perhaps that's been made one way or the other, but getting ready for sort of an ultimate call before the statute starts to run. Ashley Parker, does it seem, though, like this is such a minor issue? It could be a campaign finance violation. It's a violation of state law and other, it's fraud. But then the more serious, penalty and conviction, if he were prosecuted, would be campaign finance, that was not what the money was intended for. That said, given the insurrection, given what's happened in Georgia with Fulton County, given the classified documents and a potential obstruction of justice, if that were pursued, doesn't this seem like the least important thing to go after Donald Trump for, at least in terms of the political context?
Well, this is one of as you just outlined quite clearly, one of a cascade of legal issues that the former president is facing. And it sort of remains unclear which one will prove most damaging to him. But what this does do, and it's sort of the sheer number of them all, regardless of the results, is this just adds to the political struggles that the former president is having right now, which is that I was just out in Pennsylvania talking to dozens of voters who supported Trump in 2016 and 2020. And when you ask them what they would like, some of them, what they would like to see in 2024, they say, look, they liked Trump. They liked his policies, but they don't like the behavior. They don't like the controversy. They don't like the scandals. They think he's deeply damaged. And they point to things like this, not because they necessarily think he did anything wrong. And again, that's not for them to decide or for me to decide, but they just think he is wounded. And that is why he is in one of the weakest political positions he's been in right now. So he has the legal exposure, and then he has the political exposure as well.
And Jeremy, Michael Cohen told Nicole Wallace yesterday that he met with DA Bragg 14 times. He also recalled that the payment was also made to Karen McDougal, the Playboy model, who said she had an affair with Mr. Trump. So let me play part of Michael Cohen just yesterday.
Let's also not forget that Stormy Daniels is not the only one. There's also Karen McDougal, another claim that I pled guilty to that I had limited to no involvement. That was all David Pecker, AMI, and the National Enquirer. But they threw that on my back as well. It may not have been properly disclosed in his tax forms that he somehow believed that you can take this as a deduction.
So Michael Cohen, a prosecutor could think, is not the best witness against a former president of the United States in a highly politicized environment?
Slightly compromised, yes, I would say so. But as Andrew pointed out, there appears to be some life there in this Stormy Daniels case. I mean, it's been going on for 7 years, as you noted. I think, as Ashley would probably agree with me, having covered Donald Trump since 2015 when he launched his campaign, predicting his demise in any sense, whether legally or politically, is a pretty perilous thing to do. I mean, he's survived 2 impeachments, a special counsel, and numerous lawsuits so far at the state and local level, some still proceeding against him. Now, that's not to say that this Georgia case, which people I've spoken to are watching very closely and say poses the gravest threat to him of all of the cases out there so far, it's not to say that that Georgia case doesn't proceed and lead to his indictment.
And we do have tape now from a taped deposition where Donald Trump was interviewed by Letitia James and her New York State Attorney General colleagues. This involved the civil suit, the civil fraud suit involving tax returns as well. And he pleaded the Fifth, and here's his explanation from that deposition. This was acquired, by the way. It was a response to a CBS FOIA, Freedom of Information request, and he pleaded the Fifth for more than 400 times in this deposition, despite earlier saying that only a mob boss would take the Fifth. Here's Donald Trump.
Why are you taking the Fifth Amendment? I was asking that question. Now I know the answer to that question. When your family, your company, and all the people in your orbit have become the targets of an unfounded, politically motivated witch hunt supported by lawyers, prosecutors, and even the fake news media, you really have no choice. Anyone in my position not taking the Fifth Amendment would be a fool, an absolute fool.
So that's a very heavily lawyered statement that he is reading, Andrew Weissmann.
So I actually agree with him on the point of taking the Fifth. It's important to remember everyone has a right to take the Fifth if a truthful answer would tend to incriminate you. In a civil case, which this is, it can be used against you, unlike in a criminal case. And it is the one other thing I would disagree is when he's saying there's this essentially this witch hunt of all sorts of people, he left out jurors because the Trump organizations went to trial. They had their day in court. They could present all of their evidence. And 12 jurors, that's everyday citizens, found beyond a reasonable doubt that there was a multi-year tax conspiracy that his organizations were involved in. And there was evidence that he knew about it, as would make sense. So, that's one more reason, though, for him to be asserting the Fifth Amendment.
A legal point here is on the Stormy Daniels case, going back to that, and DA Bragg, does he have sole decision-making as to whether or not to prosecute on this, unlike in the federal system where it would go all the way up to Merrick Garland? It's such a big deal.
Yep. Here, the buck stops at Alvin Bragg. He gets to decide, and it's also useful to know that if there's an indictment and a conviction, there is no federal pardon that Trump can look to. This would stick in the same way that a Georgia indictment, if there's an indictment and conviction, that also sticks because they're state cases. So regardless what happens in the presidential election, those cases still go forward.
What about, would a state conviction, and this is I'm jumping several leaps here, hypothetically, would a state conviction bar him from holding federal office or being president?
That's a great question. I don't believe so. I don't think that as the state conviction alone, you would need to have a federal remedy.
Correct.
Now, there are all sorts of federal remedies that can come into play. That is quite a ways down the road.
But that would also be the case in Fulton County.
Yeah, the same thing. The state conviction alone would not be enough to bar him as a federal candidate, but the underlying facts that have been proved could be used by federal authorities to say he should not serve again.